Hello and welcome back to the From My Prospective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football and NFL landscapes that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. So if you'll remember all the way back probably about 2-3 weeks ago now, I did a thing that kind of was the start of a series that I wanted to spread out over the course of time, talking about the 5 biggest questions for the SEC. I'll link that down below in case you missed that one and kind of want to follow along with this. But we're taking a new conference into the forefront, and we're talking about the Big Ten. And they're perhaps the most interesting conference, at least through this past 2 week or so, because we've seen USC and UCLA join them, but that's not for now. That's a little bit down the road, and there could be plenty more teams, and there's rumors that there's going to be plenty more teams coming into the conference, but we're just looking at the core teams that are there for now and kind of where questions lie within this upcoming season. For example, a lot of teams at the end of last season had a lot of questions at quarterback. So what they went out and got some transfer portal guys, but which one of those transfer portal guys are truly going to matter? That's my first question for the Big Ten. And the 3 that I want to prioritize here is Tommy DeVito, who is going from Syracuse to Illinois, Connor Bazelak, who is going from Missouri to Indiana, and then Casey Thompson, who is going from Texas to Nebraska. QB play is the most focused upon and most dwelled upon thing in all of football, maybe even all of sports. I can't think of a position that garners as much attention and focus and everything that comes with that in any other sport. And that's because the quarterback is the face and the prime generator of offense for any team just about. So, you more likely than not need a pretty solid quarterback to be a pretty solid team. And that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. And when you look at it, quarterback play can usually be the ticket to making a good team great. Not entirely sure any of these 3 teams were just a quarterback away. We're going to prioritize talking about DeVito and Bazelak right now because we'll get to talk about Casey Thompson a little bit later down in this video. But DeVito has an injury history. He lost that starting quarterback job at Syracuse. Bazelak, he was throwing interceptions just left, right, and center at Missouri. It's going to be interesting to see if those 2 can really impact their teams that they'll be joining. And I'm not 100% sure that either one of them, because those are 2 of the least prominent teams in the Big Ten as of right now, at least in football, with Indiana and Illinois. I'm very interested to see how they use that new surrounding to potentially boost themselves up. If they can even do that, maybe these 2 won't even end up as the starters by the end of the season. They do look like they're going to be going into it, though. So those 3 names are guys to watch. Casey Thompson, like I said, we'll talk about him plenty, but they are kind of the guys that could provide the most intrigue within the conference in this upcoming season and help a team really make the jump. The next question, number 4, because we're working our way up to the biggest question for the Big Ten. But right now, can the West keep up with the East in the Big Ten? Let's play a numbers game. The Big Ten East had 3 10-plus winning teams. The West had 1. Big Ten East had 2 losing record teams. West had 3. Big Ten East had a collective record of 55-36, which is just above a 60% win rate. The West had a combined record of 48-41, which is a .539 win percentage. So those numbers show that there's at least a little bit of a disparity there. Obviously, the East was a little bit more, the West rather, was made up a little bit more by the middle there. I believe they had like 3 9-4 teams. So you've got those guys kind of helping them stay up, but as a whole, the conference was very clearly inferior to the East, and those numbers are even being helped out by Purdue, who overperformed my expectations, at least at 9-4. I know that O'Connell kid at quarterback looks pretty good right now. Minnesota, they're losing just about their entire offensive line now, and Bucky Irving at running back. Iowa losing Tyler Linderbaum, Goodson, plenty of notable players. It's really shaky, and I think whenever you look at the grand scheme of things, the East didn't do a whole lot to get worse, and I think you can ask some questions about the West that legitimately raise concern about if they're going to be able to keep up. Maybe somebody ends up beating up all the other teams, but they're still not as good. And so you get even more of a talent gap, as a bigger record gap, things of that nature, which drag their win percentage even lower. Granted, they have an entire season to prove me wrong. Maybe all the guys that they've brought in to replace guys that are headed out the door will be even better. Maybe Minnesota has a guy on the bench that's even better than Daniel Fayale, or, a better guy than Bucky, or whatever it kind of falls into. We got to wait and see. But if I'm a team in the West, this feels like the most winnable conference, or the winnable division at least, and this could be your time to move up, but it also doesn't look great if you've got an 8 or 9 win team that's taking over the West. So that's going to be interesting to follow. One team that is helping create that distance between the East and the West is Michigan. They stepped up and had one of their better years in recent memory, maybe of all time. I'm not a Michigan football historian by any means, but they had a really strong season. But is it truly sustainable? When you look at the roster, most of their defense will look different entirely. Ojabo, Hutchinson, Daxton Hill, Josh Ross, they're all gone. Hassan Haskins, Andrew Stuber on offense. There's a lot of moving around and things that are, changing for Michigan, for a lack of a better word. The one that primarily drives me here, and the reason that I'm questioning their sustainability, is because they don't have a solid quarterback right now. We thought J.J. McCarthy and Cade McNamara was going to be a quarterback's battle. J.J. McCarthy didn't end up getting on the field all that much, so right now it does look like it's going to be McNamara, at least at the beginning of the season. Plus, you can even factor in a guy like Alan Bowman. He could be somebody to watch. I don't know a whole lot about him, but people seem, at the bare minimum, interested in him. And while you're dealing with that, while you're dealing with defensive overturn, you're looking at the fact that you have new coordinators on both sides of the ball. That's a tough ask. And the path is already hard for Michigan to be a high-level team, because you have to worry about the Ohio States, and now you have to worry about Michigan State and Wisconsin and all these other teams. So with all these question marks coming into the season, and I don't think they'll be a bad program. Like, I can't imagine them finishing any lower than 9-3, but that doesn't really qualify as sustained success, at least for the level that they got to last year, and I would imagine the level that everybody is hoping and praying Harbaugh can keep them at. This year could very much be kind of a step back in comparison, and now you're back in that same position you were right before this season. So watching how they handle all these changes and all this overturn is really interesting to me, and something that I cannot wait to see unfold. Maybe they can prove that they can churn out talent like some of these other powerhouses like an Ohio State, and keep matching the talent and keep only losing 1 or 2 games in a season. But I'm not gonna say that that's official yet by any means. One team in the Big Ten that has really caught my eye, primarily because of the narrative surrounding them last year, despite their record, despite some of the issues they had, was Nebraska. All I remember hearing about Nebraska was they're the best, 3-win team of all time or whatever, because they're losing a lot, obviously, but they're keeping all these games close. So is Nebraska truly a good football program, and can they truly win something, or get bowl eligible, or just have some kind of impact this year that they very clearly could not figure out last year? Scott Frost, I would imagine the patience is running short with him, despite how praised this team was, regardless of their record. They lost by 1 possession. Here's another numbers game for you. They lost by 1 possession or less, a total of 8 times, and had a scoring margin of 0 within the Big Ten. They lost, I believe it was 7 games by 49 points or something. They beat Northwestern by 49. I don't have that directly on hand, but it was something to that nature which got them to a flat 0, despite only winning 1 game within the conference. Now, they've added Casey Thompson, who, for one, was way better than anybody is giving him credit for. Forcing him out the door at Texas, it felt weird from the beginning. Still feels weird. Nebraska got a good quarterback, and I'm excited to see how that works out. Besides, they got 2 4-stars, 5 3-stars in the transfer portal. They did a good job to bolster a roster. Plus, Ochoan Mathis has been hyped up as a big deal addition for them. Should be exciting. And, I mentioned the weak West. Where Nebraska plays, they're in the Big 10 West. and there's some potential for a turnaround. I'm not gonna stand here and, or I guess sit rather, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, yeah, they're going to win the Big Ten West and they're going to go head to head with these teams and maybe be a 10-win team. I'm not saying that, but if they can get to 7 or 8, I think that proves a lot about how good they truly were last year, and shows that all they needed were a couple of different playmakers to really push them over the hump. So that's the penultimate question. We've got one final one. And while this is a question, yes, for this season, it does kind of look beyond everything else. And I believe I also had this question in the SEC, but this is to a much larger effect, because how long are teams willing to wait, and how hot can the hot seats get for coaches as they look towards these giant programs joining the conference? Does Indiana, Illinois, Northwestern, and then even potentially Penn State and Nebraska, presuming both of those teams are underwhelming next year, how long do they let their head coaches stick around before they start to feel the heat and decide we have to get something in place here to, be a functional team and not become a laughingstock as soon as all these new teams come in? And while, yes, it does just look like two pretty good schools, which, what's the worst case? You lose a couple more games in conference to teams that people respect and think are good. As of right now, that's what that looks like that option would be. But realistically, we're looking at the Utahs joining, and maybe Colorado, and maybe even a couple Mountain West schools to bridge that gap, like I was talking about whenever they added USC and UCLA to begin with. I think there's going to become kind of a bridge between where the Big Ten is and where those schools are. That way that travel time and stuff is more spread out for everyone. I think that when you're looking at the realistic possibility that all these other schools potentially, 6, 8, 10, 12, however many schools you add here join, you could quickly become a Vanderbilt type school if you're Indiana or Illinois, to a giant program, or to a giant conference rather, and now the ladder is even larger to climb, and you're in such a deep hole at that point that it takes a lot of recovering and a lot of work on your football program to fix it. So can these schools truly afford to become that laughingstock in the Big Ten? Can they afford, in football at least? I don't think that UCLA is coming in and being immediately better than some of these programs in basketball, but we're only a football podcast, right? So if you come in, let's say it's 6 teams that join, and Indiana and Illinois are still kind of stuck in the trenches and can't figure out how to win in the conference. Maybe even Rutgers. I know they like Greg Schiano, but I'm not a Rutgers expert by any means either. I said that about Michigan. I'm certainly not about Rutgers. So if you start having these fears and worries that you're going to get left behind when all of these new teams join your conference, do you go ahead and fire a coach as early as this upcoming offseason just to get a new guy in that you can allow to build something, and that way you're prepared when all these extra teams come in? And it is truly a powerhouse conference outside of those 6, 7, 8 schools, whenever you include the new ones coming in, plus your Michigans, Michigan States, Ohio States, etc., etc. So those are my biggest questions for the Big Ten, and I've got a few more, but those are kind of the headlines because of just how things are going to fall out. Because I've said it whenever we were talking about the realignment stuff when USC and UCLA joined in. I don't know that the Big Ten is going to be as strong as they were this past year, which just, means that there's more parity and more diversity, and more teams could raise up and represent bowl games and maybe go to the college football playoffs and things of that nature. So if you've got any other questions, maybe you have an answer to one of these questions, or at least a prediction as to how it's going to go, feel free to comment down below. Both the YouTube comments and my Twitter are right below this video, my personal Twitter and the Twitter for the From My Perspective podcast. But for now, that is episode 17 of the From My Perspective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.